Hey everyone, Michael Short here. Come on, let's go outdoors. Well, according to the Alberta Trappers Association, there has been a surge in what they are calling misinformation about the trapping industry here in Alberta. So I thought I'd spend some time and talk to some trappers and folks that are involved in the education of trapping here in Alberta about what really is going on. And it's a real pleasure to kick this off with Ross Hinter, who has been a long-time trapper here in Alberta. He's heavily involved in the education of other trappers, and he's done school presentations. Ross, thanks so much for taking some time and chatting with us today.
Oh, that's great. I'm happy to be with you again, Mike.
Well, let's talk a little bit about trapping in Alberta and how your journey. How did you get involved in all of this?
Well, I was one of those kids that right early in life, I just was drawn to the forest, wherever that was at the time. And so that's where I went. That was my happy place. And even when there was times of sorrow or death in the family or things like that, I went out to the bush. And I don't know, I guess trees are really good listeners. Maybe that's what's a draw, but it's always been a draw. And then the other parts of it just unfolded as I went.
So I guess there's a lot of folks that are maybe tuning into this, and the number one question on their mind is, well, why do we still need trapping today? I hear the words, well, tradition thrown out a lot, but from what little I know about trapping, that plays a very small role in why we not only trap as a recreational need, but as it's a necessity to help maintain all sorts of things on the landscape.
There's really several different reasons that we trap, and every country in the world traps. They may not trap for fur, but they have to trap in order to control species, to control disease and things like that. So the easiest way to start is to think about a mouse trap. That's how I win everybody over, and they all seem disappointed because they say, well, that's not real trapping, but it is. It's real trapping. It's we're trying to control an animal that can overpopulate so quickly. And I have 5 children, and we lived in ranches and out in remote areas. And when my daughter ended up with a mouse that had built a nest in her sock drawer, I mean, everything changed suddenly. So population dynamics is such that wherever you have an overpopulation, what we just talked about was mice. But if I could spend more time with people and take them out into the bush, I could show them what happens when bigger animals overpopulate. And so the results are the same, whether it's human beings, mice, moose, whatever it is. If there's not enough habitat to sustain the group, we end up in problems. So I think that's the angle, and that's why provincial and federal governments continue to support trapping, because at least it helps control the amount of animals, which then brings the chance of disease and things like that down.
Ross, just talk a little bit about trapping from a conservation perspective, the importance that this activity plays in, I guess, maintaining healthy wildlife populations.
What happens is several different things. If we look at nature itself, nature has 3 basic methods that I've seen in my lifetime in the bush, and I am getting old now. But it uses predation, which is probably the best one. But that's the natural cycle of life. But when predation isn't an option, then it really leaves only 2 things, and that's disease and starvation. And they generally fall into they go together, I guess is what I'd say. And it's simple if you look it up and really think about it. When you're not getting enough to eat, or you're too stressed, you don't have enough place to stay, or you're not getting the water that you need, or especially the food, your immune system is starting to foul. It's starting to break down, and so the disease can run rampant. And that happens more than most people know. I know that because in wildlife control, that's when I get called in a lot of times. That's why we're called in, because there's a problem. So that's the best way to, if you think about that, and you have a species of animals that are continuing to take up more room than the area can sustain. And remember, as we evolve in life, we take up more and more room, and there's less and less habitat. As a matter of fact, loss of habitat is the number 1 threat to wildlife, bar none.
And as that loss of habitat happens, would it be fair to say that we owe it? We have a responsibility to influence nature, and one of the ways we have to influence it is through either hunting or trapping, because otherwise we have, as you've already explained, disease and or an explosion of a population that throws everything out of balance.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And so I think for most of us that, you know, I'm an older guy and we grew up learning about Walt Disney and some of the programs that brought out the beauty of it all. It was a part of my childhood. I loved it. But in reality, what we call the balance of nature is struggling, because we don't realize how much area we've had an effect on. And so when you look at it that way, you begin to realize that population control is the #1 part of this. And instead of banning it and stopping people from doing this, which would then, what do we do with the offspring, the overpopulation? Well, then obviously the taxpayer would have to pay for that.
I guess I have to wonder, though, is it the how of trapping that triggers such an emotional response? You might be surprised to learn that Canada is a world leader when it comes to humane trapping.
We are concerned, and I'm glad people have been upset and concerned about that, because that's what brings about the changes. We have involvement from all different groups of people, and we have what we call the Trap Research and Development Committee. And it has chairs from all different groups, animal welfare organizations and things like that, or groups like that have a chance to have some input into it. And so through that, we have studied and learned what is the best method. So whether it's our dog that got hit by a car and it can't be helped even with surgery, or an animal that we would take in the forest, we can all agree that if the animal is going to have to die, we want it to happen as quickly as possible. It's a no-brainer. It's well accepted. Even with the kindergarten kids, they realize the importance of that. So we've studied that, and I personally have to look in the mirror every night. I have 5 children. We've talked about this, and if I'm not doing things right and I think an animal's been suffering, I don't sleep well at night. I can tell you that with all assurance. So most people don't look at that. It's not a simple concept to them. But trust me, in Canada, we have spent years on this, even decades.
So talk a little bit about the evolution of traps and where we're at today in terms of what kinds of traps are being used and how they operate.
So most animals move around at night, which means they're nocturnal. And so if you can set a trap, you can catch that animal while he's moving around at night, if you can learn to study his movements and stuff. But then you capture the thing with the horrible stuff. It was brutal. And so good riddance to it. But now we've studied that, and in some cases, in most cases, hopefully we can use a trap that has been tested, proven, and designed to dispatch the animal within seconds. That's the important part. So under Canadian standards, some of the traps will do that in less than 60 seconds. But some of them, like our friend the wolverine, that is almost indestructible, the allowance for that took a little bit more, but we are talking within minutes. Let's put it that way. And so in order to do that, we had to be able to test and approve enough gear so that we could move out of that primitive stuff and allow the trapper to be able to have enough tools in his belt to be able to still operate. And we've done that. And so we have taken and developed that, and we have sent our research to 23 other countries to date. So we are still recognized as a world leader on that. Those old traps, and even though sometimes you can go on YouTube, like you and I can talk today, and you go home tonight and go on YouTube, and you can watch a YouTube from our neighbors in the United States, not to pick on them, but I mean, they're still using some traps that we outlawed here 60 years ago. Canadian standards are pretty strict, let's put it that way.
Does that spill over into legislation, at least here in Alberta as well, Ross, in terms of how the industry is regulated from a law perspective?
Yes. Yeah, so a good example on that is that any trap that's used federally, like across Canada, has to have been approved by the Canadian standard for humane trapping, or you can't use them here.
So the tools have evolved. Talk about the evolution of the trapper, him or herself, in learning how to use those tools, because it's like, you know, if you hand a firearm to somebody and they've never fired it before, they've never hunted before, there's a learning curve, and I've got to imagine the same is true when it comes to trapping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in Alberta, in most, I think every province in Canada, I don't know about the Northwest Territories, but I do know that across Canada that you have to take an education program. They're a little bit different from province to province, but we have a very strict one. It's 3 days long. And so if you want to become a trapper in Alberta, you have to take that course. And that when you're done that 3-day course, as has been pointed out by the latest that dislike us, you're not fully qualified with all of the biology and everything that you need, but you do understand, and you're tested that you understand the laws and the regulations. So it's the same. You can take a course on hunting or something. When you're done, you're not a marksman. You know, you're not a, but you're qualified to understand the laws, the legalities, and the animals that you're targeting, and that's the most important part of it, and the safety issues.
So is there opportunity for mentorship? So if I've never trapped before, but could I pick up the phone and say, hey, Ross, I'd love to come out and spend some time with you? I mean, folks that really want to understand the ins and outs of trapping and do a good job.
Exactly. Yeah, we do. We have a program that we do for youth. They come, and we call it Trappers Camp, and it just has become so popular. It fills up as soon as we open it for each year. But those students, once they've done all 3 levels of our youth camp, they get a free course to become a trapper. And they have to be 14 in order to be a licensed trapper. And those are some of the programs that how we get them started. From there, if they don't have a father or a grandpa or somebody that can take them into the field and help them to get better at it, we offer a mentoring program once a year for that group. We also have adult mentoring program for those people who don't have friends or somebody that can help them get started. They can come back to us, and we'll do a 3-day program with them. So.
Alberta Trappers Association has also provided valuable support and knowledge when it comes to assisting biologists from various conservation groups in doing some key scientific work and better understanding fur-bearing animals across our province.
Yeah, that Fisher program that you mentioned was one of my favorites, even though I wasn't the guy trapping the Fisher. But it was a relocation program in the state of Washington where we were able to team up with U.S. Biologists. After, I think, if I remember right, it's 60 to 70 years they haven't had Fisher there. And they have suitable habitat for them. And so in that particular case, live capture and release, it was an excellent program. So we got Alberta trappers involved, and we got pretty close to 150 from Alberta, and they were trapped and then quickly transported to a Calgary zoo. Actually, it was a Calgary zoo where the biologists were there, and they examined them, whether they were going to reject them or not, which I don't think there was any that were rejected, but anyway. And from there, they're quickly taken down to the state of Washington, where they were released down there. Pretty neat to watch, because they had all these people that were so excited about this reintroduction, and they're all around, and they'd open the box, and the Fisher would poke his head out, and he'd take off, and they were so excited. So that was a cool project.
And I mean, you've done work with Alberta's biodiversity and setting up trail cameras up in the northwest, northeast part of Alberta. You've done work with on the wolverines, setting up traps and helping the ACA with that.
Yeah, that was great. That was a 5-year project we did with the Alberta Conservation Association, the study of wolverine, and that was badly needed, because there's very, very little actual research that's been done on the population and the dynamics of how, their birthing, their mothering ability, and they actually found a lot of misconceptions on what we originally thought about wolverines. So they were live captured, and they took DNA, they did all kinds of things. So, and that was a really cool project. These things are so expensive; it's not a simple thing. And we've wanted to be involved in these things for many years, but we're a drop in the bucket when it comes financially. The other one that we did that is really cool was when the species at risk was trying to figure out what was happening with caribou, different predator species and stuff. A lot of the areas they wanted to work in are absolutely impassable to the average person. So they were going to fly in with choppers and to get cameras put up that they could actually get visual confirmation in some of these areas. And when we found out about it, we said, good grief, we have trappers up in that country. We got boots on the ground all over this province. Why don't we let them do it? They know that country like the back of their hand. And so instead of paying for all those helicopters and stuff, we had a small group up in that region of trappers, and they successfully went in, and they were just so excited with that. And so these type of scientific projects have really started to elevate the possibilities of the boots on the ground, so to speak.
You know, listening to you talk about this, Ross, I'm kind of struck that I know you identify as a trapper, but would it be fair to say that you are also a conservationist?
Well, yeah, I like that. And when I've done lectures or things like that with the University of Alberta and other colleges, Lakeland College, I just did one there for the environmental sciences. That's actually how they introduced me, and it makes me feel really good because, in all sincerity, when you start out when you're young, you want to capture, you want to get out and you want to do those things, but after a while you begin to realize the wisdom of actually paying attention to what's happening in the forest and to make sure that there's a healthy population of them. And that's the role that trappers play, but we're still carrying the sins of our forefathers, Mike, any which way we look at it. And so a lot of people look at us as monsters and don't actually realize the benefits to it.
I know you've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I want to come back to it, and that's around the perception and the need to have trapping. I know you and others have worked with municipalities, whether it be with coyote issues or beaver issues. I mean, there is a demand for your services among these rural communities, even in the large cities. I mean, we have a coyote problem in Edmonton and Calgary and some of the other larger areas that, if ignored, people get quite upset.
That's what we try to help trappers to understand, the effect that we have. And when overpopulation happens like that, and beaver and coyotes in cities is a huge one. It's really big. And one of the reasons for that is that there's no predators left there for them. And when I explain that to people, they're blown away because they don't understand. They say to me, we should leave them alone. We shouldn't interfere with nature. And I tell them, but we built a city on the edge of a river with over 1 million people in it. We can't just turn our back on that. And so they don't want anything to happen to the beaver, as an example. So when you explain to them how many colonies are there and you do your homework on it, and what are the main predators to beaver? People say fox or coyote or ravens or all kinds of things. So the average beaver is about 45 pounds. Some of them, the biggest one I ever caught was in a city, and it was 81 pounds. I could hardly pick it up. Anyway, the reason for that is the two main predators. It doesn't mean other animals don't attack them and try to kill them to eat, but the main ones are bears and wolves. So what city with 1 million people in it wants bears and wolves coming in their city? So they don't realize until somebody helps them to understand that we have knocked out the main thing that nature would use. And that leaves either we do something or we leave it for disease and starvation. That's not acceptable. That's just not the way to look after things. Recently I've spent quite a bit of time with the Netherlands, groups from the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands they have an enormous problem with muskrats. And in the Netherlands they don't consider trapping for fur an acceptable practice, but they have to control the muskrats. So they burn them. They burn the whole animal, they incinerate it to get rid of it. And in there, it's an acceptable practice. But here in Canada, the idea is to take them at the right time of the year, not when they're having babies, and then to do something with the fur. And believe me, Mike, you don't get rich on fur. So anyway, it's just the proper way to manage, in my opinion.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ross. I know I certainly welcomed the opportunity to sit down and get a different perspective about this industry on our landscape. Of course, there are many different opinions about what we think about trapping in our province, and it's important to respect those different beliefs. And it's to that end that I hope that this conversation helps provide you with, I guess, some facts that might replace, can I say that, some of the emotional response to this topic. We're going to continue with this conversation in a future episode, so I hope you stick around for that. Till next time, I'm Michael Short. Come on, let's go outdoors.